Good evening. This is Redwood Wonk. I'm with Dave Frank. My name is Eric Kirk, and we are here to talk politics of the day. The holidays have passed. This is the first show of the new year, 2022. We have a lot to talk about tonight. Of course, tomorrow will be the first anniversary of the January 6th insurrection. But before we get to that topic, a very important figure of recent American politics has passed away. Reid, former Senate Majority Leader, Senator from Nevada, has passed away. Wasn't always my favorite political figure, kind of moderate for my tastes, blocked a lot of stuff that I was interested in, possibly was the person who prevented, well, I wouldn't go that far, but blunted the momentum of Bernie Sanders in 2016. Nevada was pretty much where his momentum got stopped after Bernie Sanders had won big in New Hampshire against Hillary Clinton. But famous for some other things, he would be surprisingly conservative in some ways and surprisingly progressive in other ways. In the 1980s, I was involved in trying to get Yucca Mountain, the nuclear waste facility that was very dangerous, was making a lot of people sick in indigenous communities nearby because of the uranium, and he actually shut that down. It was not a safe nuclear waste facility, at least as far as I was concerned. Granted, I'm not an expert on the subject. He shut it down, even though it could have meant a lot of money to Nevada. Very famous for a lot of things, including he didn't have a lot of social graces. People would be on phone calls with him, and he wouldn't say goodbye; he'd just hang up. People would on him, and the rest. I know a lot of people, conservatives, don't like him. Some people blame him for polarizing, politics. He introduced the so-called nuclear option in terms of moving away from the filibuster. Some people blame him for that because then McConnell basically took it further, and maybe that's why we have the Supreme Court that we have now. But on the other hand, he did start to move us away from the filibuster. Maybe that will be good in the long run. Who knows? But he was a different sort of politician in a lot of ways, and there's a lot to talk about. And I don't know that I would praise him as one of our best figures or one of our worst figures. He's just is a fascinating person, a Mormon. Who was personally opposed to abortion, but did not believe that the power of the state should be used to impose that morality. That's a very nuanced position to take. He showed up and spoke at his staff's a staff member's single-sex wedding. Despite the fact that he was a devout Mormon. Very interesting human being. Dave, you've got some things to say?
Yeah, of course. On the passing of historic figures of this nature, you get exposed to a lot of different people's opinions and for lack of a better word, like sort of, paying their respects. And I think one phrase I heard that I thought was really kind of summed him up. He was an unapologetic street fighting partisan. And not to get super personal, I know this is more about policy, but apparently he actually, he was also a fighter, like he physically could fight. So that and he was very working class sensibilities, and so he would ask people what school they went to, and if they said that it was a Ivy League school, he would kind of put them lower in his judgment because he felt that people who had to struggle, he had more respect. I believe that's how it was described. After 3 decades in Congress, he spent 8 years as the Senate Majority Leader. That led, Joe Biden, who was a colleague of his, said he was one of the all-time great Senate Majority Leaders. And this is one of the points I thought was really interesting. It wasn't about power for power's sake. This is according to Joe Biden. It wasn't about power for power's sake. It was about the power to do right for the people. So I have a couple of interesting takes on it. Other takes that I heard. One was very much about what you said with the filibuster. So I'll
Mhm.
play on what you said. I guess Chris Cillizza from CNN. He basically, one of the things he thought was, he said that this is his biggest legacy. Actually, this will be the thing that people remember the most, was that he decided to take that nuclear option. In fact, I guess back in 2013, judicial nominees were getting blocked by the Republicans. He changed the filibuster rules, and that way they were able to get federal judges. So they did take that nuclear option. They changed the rules unilaterally, but then unfortunately, when Republicans took over, they were able to actually get the Supreme Court tweak the rules to increase the set of people that could be put in place just on a basically a partisan basis. Majority, would dominate. So Mitch McConnell, was able to say, oh, well, if you'll do that, we'll do this. And he, even to up till recent times, he said he's not apologetic about that, even though people are like, well, look at the Supreme Court we currently have. This is because you greased the skids on the filibuster. Mm-hmm. And his quote is, the rules had to be changed. We had many cabinet officers and sub-cabinet officers we simply couldn't get a vote on. And the judges, more than 100 vacancies waiting to be filled. We already had their names, so I have no doubt I did the right thing. So there's a pragmatism there that I think maybe we could reflect on in our current plight, where we're talking about, are we going to waive the filibuster for voting rights legislation? And I think that his philosophy should encourage Speaker or Leader Schumer to, Senate Leader, Majority Leader Schumer to as he is hinting he's going to do, to go forward. But we'll talk about that further on down the road tonight.
Yeah, and besides which, I don't think McConnell, sure, it gives him a convenient excuse, but McConnell was just all about power. He would have done it anyway. I mean, it's just, that I have nothing about that. But Harry Reid did introduce a very interesting aspect of politics, and maybe you can say that it was polarizing, but speakers of the House of the past, he wasn't into having big dinners with his opponents. He was a strictly business kind of guy. He also did not show up to those lavish fundraisers with lobbyists, and that really annoyed him. He's like an old-fashioned politician that way. I mean, Kyrsten Sinema is sort of the opposite of that. Right in the middle of all this controversy where people are accusing her of being bought, she flies back to Arizona specifically to go to lavish, hot tub fundraisers. You would not see him caught dead at one of those things, even when the eyes weren't on him about those things. It wasn't even that he didn't want to be seen that way. He just it didn't interest him. And that was partly because of his working class background. And he was far from a socialist or even a social democrat, but a lot of the policies he did push were working class interests. And that's why we had, student loan and a lot of that type of stuff. But he also was an environmentalist. And progressive in certain ways, not in other ways, but and again, a mixed bag.
Tonight I stand before you, tested by adversity, made sensitive by hardship, a fighter by principle, and the most optimistic man in America.
I didn't make it in life because of my athletic prowess. I didn't make it because I'm a genius. I made it because I worked hard.
There are known knowns. There are things we know. We also know there are known unknowns, but there are also unknown unknowns. The ones we don't know. It is the latter category that tend to be the difficult ones.
When I hear your new ideas, I'm reminded of that ad, "Where's the beef?"
And the client asks you a question. How do you guys get comfortable? It's a question. So, what was your answer?
Mr. Chairman,
did you tell him?
Sure, Mr. Chairman, I'm just trying to understand.
No, I think you understand it. I don't think you want.
Okay, well, it is January 5th, 2022. Tomorrow is the first anniversary since January 6th. A lot going on. Of course, the January 6th committee, a lot going on. Ex-President Trump was supposed to hold a press conference tomorrow at Mar-a-Lago. He has, under pressure from allies, canceled that. However, Marjorie Taylor Greene and Matt Gaetz are going to be holding one. Of course, Marjorie Taylor Greene will probably be complaining about the fact that she lost her Twitter account, one of her Twitter accounts, the other day, because of apparently some COVID stuff talking about how vaccinated people are just as likely to die as non-vaccinated people. Completely not true, using misleading statistics. And so you have all of this up there. Meanwhile, we're learning more about we're getting further away from the storming of the Capitol and more into the back issues of what was happening. Merrick Garland has come out saying we will prosecute all aspects, no matter how high up it goes. Kind of an interesting comment to make. Sean Hannity is the latest one that they want to come talk about some of his emails, and it's very interesting that Cuomo's brother had to resign from CNN for having involved himself in a political cover-up, but it seems like these Fox News quote-unquote journalists were involved from the beginning, sending emails, political advice, like in detail throughout this whole process. I mean, who knows how many other political processes they involve themselves in, because this is like the third Fox News figure to be sending extensive emails to a political, to involve themselves in a political process. But apparently they want him to come and provide more information, and they've released some of his emails. I think that's the latest. Anything else to update us, Dave?
I think you touched on all the points. I just think it's worth reiterating a little bit that, I think former President Trump really did need to be convinced not to do his grandstanding event at Mar-a-Lago, and one of the leaked rumors on this was that people familiar with the matter say he had advisors telling him that just reschedule your next event for a day that's not going to draw attention to the low point of your presidency. That was the quote that I saw, and so with like you said, Matt Gaetz and Marjorie Taylor Greene, they're inclined to just do a press conference. I don't think they have very much shame in their game at this point, and they're just calling it a Republican response on the anniversary of the protest. But in part because the news media is going to be focused, mainstream media, of course, is going to be focused on many remembrance events. So Vice President Kamala Harris, I think she'd released some information about events she'll be a part of. Speaker Pelosi in the House, she's released some events she's going to be part of, including a moderated discussion with historians John Meacham and Doris Kearns Goodwin. A prayer vigil, a moment of silence. So John Meacham is kind of like he is a very highly respected author and kind of historian, narrator of the status quo. I mean, he's got a lot of gravitas. So in comparison to that, I suspect that any event that Matt Gaetz and Marjorie Taylor Greene hold will just be, pretty much inconsequential. I do think it's worth noting also, like you said, that Merrick Garland's speech today. So were you referring to just like the news release that Merrick Garland is what he said was like, hey, look, I'm gonna pick up, we're gonna go through every rock and crevice here. Mm-hmm. So I just want to expound on that a little bit. Besides just saying that he's going to do prosecutions at every level, he actually made a continuous thread. So he was actually linking together. This is from, I'm going to give credit here, Charles Pierce from Esquire, his comments on the speech. He said he compared it to the Nixon impeachment, where there was not a lot leaked at all. Everybody was kind of concerned about how slowly moving this investigation appeared to be. But then John Doerr showed up with a binder of the case to be made against the former president, or President Nixon, and that was an open and shut case. And then that was it. Like it was over. And he also, that same person, worked on, Robert Kennedy's case for voting rights in 1961, his advocacy when he was Attorney General for voting rights. So I think Merrick Garland made the connection between the fact that the Department of Justice's role, its purpose, The original purpose of the Department of Justice was to protect the lives, rights, and the franchise of newly freed Black citizens in the South in the early years after the Civil War. So he made this connection about the importance of voting rights. And I think that's something that we'll sort of see. There'll be connections made probably tomorrow in the remembrance.
Yes. Yeah. There is a lot going on, and I think we're sort of in the doldrums with the committee itself. I think that this will pick up later, and obviously the Democrats on the committee are very happy to let Liz Cheney be the spokesperson of it. I mean, she's the most outspoken one. Republicans are going to attack her. I haven't looked at any polls. I don't know if she's expecting to be reelected. I don't know what the status of that election is. But she is sort of out in the forefront. She doesn't mind that. I think she's hoping to become some sort of spiritual leader of the party at that, at a certain point, maybe make a comeback. I think we've kind of talked about that later, but she's thinking long game at this point and fighting for the soul of the party. And who knows what's going to happen, but Trump definitely wants to make his speech because he wants to make the big lie the issue of 2022, which of course is the dread of the Republicans, because that's probably the only way they don't retake Congress, is if the candidates in the swing districts are forced to take a stand one way or another as to whether or not there's a big lie. Youngkin managed to eke out a win in Virginia by avoiding that. By not being able to do that. If they have to take that stand, and this is the hard thing, is that Republicans are trying to find rhetorical ways to condemn what happened on January 6th without condemning Trump. They're really trying to do that, and maybe this is a sign by him agreeing not to do this tomorrow that he's going to try to work with them, but that's going to be really hard. And if he becomes more aggressive, as the campaign season goes on, it's going to be really hard, especially in the swing districts for the Republicans. And we'll see how that plays out, because the Democrats are going to be saying, "Hey, which is it?" They're not going to be playing easy with it. And they don't have to push the issue. They don't even have to bring up the big lie. You can just say, "Well, which is it? Is it, did Biden win or didn't he?" It's a basic, simple question.
Yeah, and we've heard people really try to, thread the needle on that, and very unsuccessfully. I'll just say one last thing on this. Liz Cheney, you mentioned her. So one of her most famous quotes, I think I heard. I'm repeating it again this week. We've covered it before, and it is like it really resonates. Did Donald Trump, through action or inaction, corruptly seek to obstruct or impede Congress's official proceedings to count electoral votes? And that hearing, that was for the committee, January 6th committee, as a representative of that committee. And I think that they're going to try to really make the case that in fact that they can connect the dots, and that they can, bring people to draw those conclusions for themselves. Yeah.
Meanwhile, anyway, we have to go on to the next one, but McConnell says maybe we need to look at how we count the electoral college votes. Weasel. Anyways, next topic.
The Court of Appeals here in Washington has ruled quickly in our favor. We are getting a clearer picture of what happened, who was involved, and who paid for it, and where the money went.
Mr. Meadows received numerous text messages, which he has produced without any privilege claim, imploring that Mr. Trump take the specific action we all knew his duty required.
We do not take this vote lightly, but this committee and this Congress is left with no other alternative when, in the midst of an investigation of this magnitude, we are stonewalled at every turn by those who played a central role in the planning and execution of the January 6th attack.
The committee favorably report to the House the committee's report on a resolution recommending that the House of Representatives find Mark Randall Meadows in contempt of Congress.
All right, there is a lot of redistricting news, but we're not going to get to it all this week because there is so much to talk about. I'm going to focus on two states, but you've got a little bit of updating news. We've talked about how, although the states have chosen their quote-unquote final maps, that there are some lawsuits out there based on Voting Rights Act and even some other laws that you've been reading up about. Dave, you want to start with that?
Yeah, I think the best way to start this is there was a quote from Merrick Garland from yesterday, I believe, maybe even today. The days are blurring. But basically, he said that there are attorney generals. There's a wave of state laws restricting voting access, and a number of new partisan gerrymandered maps have been justified by unfounded claims of material vote fraud in the 2020 elections. And he goes on to say that basically, we know what our mandate is. We know what we need to do. We need fair elections here. And so in the states of Alabama and North Carolina, both states that have already formally approved their maps, there are, in fact, there are legal proceedings in play questioning the validity of those maps. And so, similar to the Brennan Center says, they recommend independent panels created at the state level with matching federal legislation. So that way, there's a comprehensive, legal framework around fair and just voting districts. But so for the state of Alabama, there are 3 separate cases challenging the congressional districts at the federal level, and they're alleging that the new maps racially gerrymandering, violating Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. So that's what's happening in Alabama. North Carolina is very similar, but it's a state court trial. They decided to make consolidated cases for both the congressional and state legislative districts that were drawn in the formally approved maps. And these plaintiffs allege that the new state districts are partisan and racial gerrymandering in violation of the state constitution. So that trial, the court has agreed for an expedited review in front of a panel of 3 judges with a deadline of January 11th. So they're giving themselves only a week to hear all the arguments. So that's the state Supreme Court. So the state Supreme Court ordered the judge panel to review these on an expedited basis. So we're going to know pretty quickly. And so that's the 2 that are in legal limbo as we speak.
Wow. Okay. Well, we'll see. North Carolina is definitely one of those where they have split a district. And in fact, that led to a retirement of a longtime black congressman. And I wonder if he'll come back out of retirement or reverse that if they prevail on that. I don't know. Although he has cited other reasons too. All right. Well, I don't want to waste too much time here. I want to focus on 2 states today, New Jersey and Ohio. New Jersey, if you're watching on television, you'll be able to see the map of 538. If you're listening on the radio, I encourage you to go to 538. I've talked about this before, and in the right-hand column, you'll see the redistricting maps. They have excellent graphics, and you just have to click on it, and you pass over, and it'll tell you what each district is. I don't necessarily agree with how they evaluate the advantages of each district in terms of Republican versus Democrat. Sometimes they have it right, sometimes they don't. I don't know that they necessarily have it right in New Jersey. Arizona, I think they do, for instance, but I've explained that in other shows. I don't have time to go into it with this show. But if you look at New Jersey, you'll be able to see that they have an old map and a new map. The old map is the one that with the current districts, and the new map is the one that was just approved. There probably won't be a lawsuit about this because in New Jersey, they have a bipartisan situation with a tie break is done by the Chief Justice of the state Supreme Court. And this time it benefits Democrats. They won't gain any seats, but they consolidate seats. And in one case, in the old map, there was Andy Kim had upset a longtime Republican incumbent in a district, the 3rd district, which was Republican heavy, and it was a very big upset. And Andy Kim was the first Asian American to win in that area. And in the new map, he is much better off. He will probably win that. On the other hand, Democrat Tom Malinowski had a more favorable map and is now in a highly competitive seat, but he's got most of his old district. He probably, as an incumbent, can hold on if he can hold on against the red wave. So, doing that, it comes down to if you're able to see the map, if you're watching television, or on the internet, you'll see that it basically goes from several very competitive districts and 3 Republican-leaning districts to basically 2 Republican-leaning districts and a bunch of Democratic-leaning districts with a very competitive district that I think a Democrat will hold on to. Anything you want to say about that, Dave?
No, nothing in particular. I'll let you keep going.
All right, I'm going to switch over to Ohio, where the Republicans have total control over the system, and they have just run rampant. Not that the old one wasn't gerrymandered, but you had the famous Duck District of Jim Jordan, that is benefited to keep him in, and then you had the Snake by the Lake, Democrat Marcy Kaptur. It looks like they've found a way to basically gerrymander her out. Because in the new map, they've pretty much made her, put her into a Republican district. The 538 rates it as +8 Republican by extending her to further west into some very rural areas. She is going to run. She's very popular. She still has a bunch of the lake side areas that are kind of liberal, but it's going to be a tough road for her, and there are already Republicans lining up to run against her. And pretty much they put Tim Ryan into a very Republican district with incumbent Bill Johnson. That's fine with him because he's running for governor, as we know. Where the Democrats feel and as you can see, Anthony Gonzalez is in a very competitive map now. In the old map, he was a little bit better off, but they think that he can pretty much hold on. Of course, Ohio lost a district. Columbus, of course, is Joyce Beatty. She's pretty well safe. But where the Republicans might have a little bit of a problem is down to in the left-hand corner of Cincinnati. It's a little bit more competitive. I don't think it's as competitive as 538 indicates. I'm not going to go into all the reasons why. But Steve Chabot is the incumbent there. Democrats are hoping that they can raise a challenge to him. Unfortunately, the best people they have to run against him aren't so far stepping up to the plate to try to do that. One of them wants to run for a state position instead. But they are hoping for that there. But it looks like basically that the the Republicans will probably gain a couple of seats and consolidate. And it looks like Jim Jordan doesn't have to be in a Duck district anymore. He's got a big district that is basically rated Republican 38 by 538 out north of Columbus, and he will probably be elected again if he's not in jail, that is. And Shontel Brown will hold on to her Cleveland district very easily, and it'll probably just be down to 2 Democrats in all of Ohio. Anything you want to say about that, Dave?
Just for some folks who maybe don't have all the data right in front of them, like you mentioned, those 2 Democratic districts. To me, this is a classic example of what gerrymandering is sort of designed to do, which is put all the people who are against you into districts where they have their own safe seats, but you make as few of those as possible. So in this case, you mentioned Shontel Brown. Her seat is plus 55 Democrat. Yeah. So that's almost, think about it in terms of 100, and it's like, what is that? 70-30 is only plus 40. So that's really, and that's what Joyce Beatty's seat is, to the 3rd district. So these 2 districts are plus 55 and plus 40. That's mission accomplished. I know we're close to wrapping up. I just did want to mention briefly New York, because I think there is a development in New York worth mentioning. So they have, what I said at the top of the topic is the Brennan Center recommends independent commissions for this. Well, New York has the voters elected they passed an independent commission, but the problem was the way they structured the commission was 50-50 Republicans and Democrats with no independents. So of course what happened is what you would expect. They created two maps. And they compromised only marginally. And so how does that play out? Well, they're going to lose a seat. New York's going to lose a seat. But right now it's 19 Democratic seats and 8 Republican seats. So they're going to drop down from 27 to 26. The Democrats kind of played nice a little bit, and there's 17 proposed Democratic seats and 9 potential GOP seats. But the problem is they did not choose a map to put forward to the legislature to approve. They put 2. So that means the legislature has the power, which all these commentators expect to happen. They have the power. And they can just
redraw it.
They're going to totally redraw it, and they could potentially redraw it with as few as 3 GOP seats. If they don't do that, this could go to the state Supreme Court, so they're not going to let that happen. They're going to draw it their way probably.
All right. More on that later. Last quick note, Marcy Kaptur, don't count her out, back in Ohio. Okay, that takes us to another topic.
I, Richard Billhouse Nixon, do solemnly swear.
I, Gerald R. Ford, do solemnly swear.
I, Jimmy Carter, do solemnly swear.
I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear.
I, George Herbert Walker Bush, do solemnly swear.
I, William Jefferson Clinton, do solemnly swear.
I, George Walker Bush, do solemnly swear.
I, Barack Hussein Obama, do solemnly swear.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear.
I, Joseph Robinette Biden Jr., do solemnly swear. So help me God.
Okay, filibuster reform. A little bit of movement. Manchin, maybe feeling a little bit on the defensive, as we may have noted. There is some possibility their negotiations are going to reopen with Build Back Better. At least Biden has said so. Manchin hasn't indicated too much movement on that. But he did indicate some movement in terms of not getting rid of the filibuster, but changing the Senate rules a little bit. And one of them is while you would still require 60 votes to pass the bill, you wouldn't require 60 votes to start the debate. And that could be actually very meaningful. Because if you can have a meaningful debate that grabs national attention about something like voting rights, and you've got the media covering it day in and day out and talking about the history of what Jim Crow and what these laws mean, and having it could actually have a political effect around that, and maybe you get a few Republicans. I mean, it's a possibility, and other issues as well. If you actually have to debate it rather than just shut it down right away and basically be able to veto it by email. A few other changes he was open to, but that's a big one right there. Dave?
Yeah, and so I would say this is happening in the context of Schumer, majority leader in the Senate. Schumer has said, hey, when Martin Luther King Jr. Day comes along on January 17th of 2022, if we don't have a filibuster carve-out in agreement in place, if we don't have progress on these 2 voting rights acts and potentially the actual revisions to the original Voting Rights Act, if we don't have progress on these things, we're going to unilaterally act. So that's that nuclear option. And so the nuclear option, unfortunately, really requires all 50 senators to be on board. So Schumer, and what he's going to do is he's going to, theoretically, this is hypothetically because it's in the future, but what he's going to do is he's going to basically present a set of rule changes on behalf of the Democratic Party, and he's going to make everybody vote on them. And he's going to force Manchin and Sinema, who have thus far said they're not interested in rule changes. Sinema said she's outright not interested. Manchin says he prefers to do these things in a bipartisan way. And what he's saying is that actually Republicans could possibly get behind that first, there's 3 changes he proposed, but he did say that first change you proposed, that he's talked to Republicans over the years, and they could be behind that because they like the idea of being able to get up there in the floor of, the chamber of the Senate and say their piece about the legislation that they would like to be discussed. And right now that can be totally shut down and squelched with filibuster, with the idea of a filibuster. So the idea that you can start debate, that's a big one that Manchin thinks he can get some Republicans, at least in tacit approval, if not actual, de facto approval. Of course, Schumer doesn't believe that's possible, but Manchin does need to have a unified argument here about why he could be, preventing progress here. So that's the first one that you mentioned. I don't know if you have a couple more in mind or if you want me to keep going.
No, you go ahead. But the problem is he did this before. He put out his own voting rights bill, hoping to get some kind of Republican support, but they shut him down. They said, no, we don't want any changes. We like it the way it is. We want these laws in place. So it's not like he's talking like he's not like promising that there's any Republicans out there that are willing to work with him. McConnell runs a tight ship. He doesn't get very much dissent. But go on.
Yeah, so I mean, just to be clear, to put a fine point on what you said, Manchin said in an interview with someone from the Hill. I'm drawing a blank on the author's name, but he said that's a rule change I think Republicans. And then he said they've been for that before. So in other words, he's trying to convince himself, like, hey, look, if you guys have told me you want this change, then maybe I, in good faith, can support this change, especially if Schumer's going to get out there and there's going to be, 48 senators out there saying, we want the bill that Manchin said he would support, but why won't he do it? This is about, like you said, voting rights, civil rights, et cetera. The second one, though, is that another one that he thinks that Republicans can get behind is to put the power back in the hands of committees. Yeah. So this is just a procedural thing. But right now, as it stands, one senator who doesn't want something to be debated on the floor can just block the vote. He could just block it from being talked about and then make them spend many days and weeks trying to get a conversation about it, trying to get a vote on it. So there's a procedural rule they're thinking about saying, like, look, if a bill comes out of committee and the committee and a majority of the committee supports it, that they would streamline it so that they could get an up or down quick vote almost immediately. And that might actually be a really interesting approval, from the perspective of somebody looking for a rule to make the more efficient and more productive. Now, granted, it goes against the idea of comity that all 100 senators get to decide what's going to go into any given bill, but it's just another one of the things. And a guaranteed up or down vote on the Senate floor. That's another one of his proposals.
But they can decide that on the floor. They still, they can make amendments, propose amendments on the floor. They don't have to block it on the committee. If ever, has the right. They've just made it too easy. I mean, and hopefully he's got it. But the problem is he's not actually proposing them. He's floating it out there. He's very careful to say, I'm not proposing these. I just want to see if any Republicans are interested, right? And that's the problem is, it used to be he would say, I know there are Republicans interested because he would have talked to them, right? And doing this, but he doesn't have any of that. He just talks and the rest, but he'll be pretty embarrassed on Martin Luther King Day if it goes through and he's the one blocking it. I haven't heard anything from Sinema on this. No. So it's hard to say, but this is a big deal. I mean, in the past, they've also talked about making it be a talking filibuster.
That's the third one. That's what I was going to go to finally here. So if you don't mind, I'll kick it out.
Go ahead, because I didn't see that in his.
Yeah. So the third thing that Manchin said is that he supports requiring the 3/5 of the senators present and voting to be the filibuster, which is basically like the talking filibuster, because you absolutely have to have 100 people who are used to flying around on planes and going to do their jam, take care of their business the way they take care of it. If you've got an important issue at hand, you got to keep as many of those people there 24 hours a day on the Senate chamber floor as you can. And if any of them decide to go home, then that frees up the other side to potentially call a vote immediately. So this is a way, and again, this is not a panacea, not a cure-all, but the idea is that if there's anybody absent, then you do have the ability possibly to push through your legislation without it, just like you said, someone can just email in, nope, I'm against it. You show 60 emails or, whatever, you show 51 emails, and then you're like, okay, well, we can't even talk about it. But this would be quite different.
Yeah. I mean, It would be fine, and I don't think it has to be like that Mr. Smith goes to Washington where one. They don't have to make it an endurance test. They should be able to hand it off to other people. The point is it should be ongoing, and you shouldn't have to be reading off dictionaries and stuff like that. It should be meaningful, but it should have to go on so that it becomes a national discussion. What's going on there? That's the whole point. And then there's feedback from the public, and then they know whether or not it's or at least have an idea as to whether or not their opposition is popular or not, and at least factor that in because right now as we know, cinema blocked it, and Manchin were blocking things. It wasn't popular. He wasn't talking about what he did talk about what the people of Virginia wanted, but the coal miners immediately said, no, that's not what we want. It was what the people who paid him money wanted, and that would be anyway. They would be embarrassed.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's just so it's hope. It's hope that maybe there's movement before. We got about a week and a half before Martin Luther King's celebration of his birthday anyway.
Yeah.
So, okay, in the news, it's Omicron. And of course, it's a perfect topic for me because I am infected with Omicron. I'm not sure if it's Omicron yet, only I'm not really feeling very sick, so I tend to think it is. I think if it was Delta, I'd probably not doing the show. I'd probably be in bed, but I did test positive from it. I think I got it from my father, who visited over Christmas, brought it up from Sonoma County. Anyway, I did have a positive test, so I can't go to work, but I can do this. I don't think I can infect you through the internet. So, but it is not affecting. It's not killing as many people. It doesn't look like it's going to kill me. Knock on wood. But it is spreading like wildfire. It spreads like crazy, and it does need to be managed because some people will be hospitalized for it. I am fully boosted, so that probably is a benefit. It's probably what's keeping it from being more serious. Probably at least keeping me out of bed, if not, from being hospitalized. And it looks like, this time there's not going to be another shutdown of the economy from it, because I think the CDC has figured out they have to take into account mental health and all of that, as well as the economy. And they want to keep the economy moving. They've got inflation as a problem, but they also want to keep the expansion going. We're about to get a jobs report in 2 days and an unemployment report. They're hoping that it's going to be a little bit better than last month's. I think they're expecting it to be, but there's always expectations and how it actually comes out. And I think the idea isn't to defeat Omicron at this point, but to manage it, to contain it as much as possible. But the infections are skyrocketing. I went to the Warfinger, so my infection is going to add to those statistics of the skyrocketing infections, and hospitalizations are increasing too. They may decrease because this is less severe than other variants, less severe even than Delta. But he's laid out some. They've also lowered the guidelines. Supposedly, I could go back after 5 days of not having symptoms, I think, or 5 days after I officially test positive. I'm not quite sure. I'm not going to do that. I'll feel better. Maybe, after a negative test. They're not even adding the negative test to the guidelines this time around. I think partly because there's some ambiguity. They're saying that positive tests can linger even after you're fine and not infectious with this new variant. But I don't know. I just don't want to get anybody sick who could get a lot sicker than I am. And I'm in my late 50s and I'm doing fine, but it doesn't necessarily have to do with age necessarily. It could have to do with people with underlying health issues. And so, knowing that I could be very dangerous to somebody, got to be responsible of that. But, I'm not sure about the CDC guidelines, and I'm a Fauci fan, but it's just, it's really hard. And, but there is the speech about the guidelines. I'm paying close attention to them. And I'm confused. Because and if I'm confused, I'm sure a lot of people are confused. It's really confusing about the schools. Different school districts are doing their own thing. Some of them here are testing everybody going in. Other school districts are like, well, we have tests if the kids want it. I tried to get a home testing kit. I was lucky to find one at the CV over on Myrtle, but they don't have them anymore. Some are supposed to come in on Friday. I'm sure they'll all be bought out. Warfinger, I got lucky in there to get there without an appointment, but really you need to set an appointment. They said 400 people went in there that day. We have this test shortage. Biden is supposed to be addressing that. What do you got to say, Dave?
So yeah, there's a lot here. I mean, we could talk a little bit. I'd say it's worth just mentioning this, just for data, so we're all on the same page. Johns Hopkins is the reputable source that I've been going to for the last couple of years. They indicated that on Monday there was 1 million cases. That was the first time we've had a number that big. Also, the New York Times uses just this data to do a 14-day, like a 2-week average, moving average. That number hit yesterday, I think, or rather, today, 548,000 daily cases on a 2-week moving average. It's the first time that's been above 300,000 since this pandemic started. So it's really double. So that's, the spread is real. And just in terms of how many states, if you look at the map, almost all the states are red right now. The top 26 worst affected states, it's all twice as many cases as it had 2 weeks ago. So that the worst states right now in terms of the rapidity, the increase in caseload, Alabama, Louisiana, Florida, Mississippi, it's all 6 to 7 times more. So 600 to 700% higher. California, where we're happen to be sitting right now, it's 5 times more. So we have 500% more cases now than we had 2 weeks ago. We're right up there in the mix with the big spreading places. One more thing about the science, which I think is worth mentioning, even though we're supposed to be talking politics, this one strain, this new one, this Omicron, it's got like 50 mutations. One of those elements of the mutation is that it kind of sticks a little bit stronger, but it doesn't stick to the proteins in the lungs. It sticks to the proteins above the lungs, which makes it more spreadable because the aerosols are going out there more, but we're getting less sick. So that's the science. Makes sense. You don't have to be a partisan for any of this stuff. There's evidence there. They're learning more as we go. This is all preliminary. But now you mentioned the CDC quarantine and isolation guidance was lowered to 5 days if you have an asymptomatic infection like yourself, which, by the way, I should have said it earlier. Sorry to hear that you got it, but I'm happy to see that you seem to be doing fine so far. So this lowering to 5 days, there's a couple things. Well, I gave you the medical reasons, like the things that I said are the medical reasons. And on top of that, there's one more medical reason that CDC Director Rochelle Walensky said. She also said that it's less transmissible after those first 5 days. So you're very transmissible before you're symptomatic, and then it kind of wanes relatively rapidly. And this is preliminary. Who knows how accurate that is? They said that's the medical reason. But there's also an economic reason, and I'm going to give her a quote. She said this recommendation was based on anticipation of a large number of cases that might impact societal function because of the highly contagious variant. So this is now they're not just talking about public health. They're not just talking about overwhelming the hospitals and overwhelming and crashing the medical system explicitly. They're talking about all function. Yes. So, for example, we see the airlines, having less flights. That over 1,000 flights canceled a day. I was impacted by that. So there's that piece of it. There's also, the schools. So the question is, are we going to keep all these people quarantined for this huge amount of time? So this would affect workers. This would affect students. This would affect, it would ripple through many industries. But I think it's worth mentioning this last element of this here, which I want to bring to everybody's attention, is that, the American Medical Association has criticized this decision because it did not include a testing component. Yeah. And they say that's going to result in tens to hundreds of thousands more of unnecessary cases. That's just back of an envelope, I'm pretty sure, on their part, because nobody really knows about future contingencies like this. But the idea that President Biden made an announcement that he's going to make 500 million tests available through an online portal someday, that's a presidential decree. I think this is the response to the reality that our country maybe kind of missed the boat a little bit on ramping up the necessary testing for us to actually have back in the original part of this, the track and trace, but now maybe the reassurances for people getting their kids back in school right in the face of us having all of these cases.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I don't think anybody anticipated this variant that would spread this quickly. I mean, it's just, that wasn't anticipated. Now, you can't make an excuse like that if you're president. You just can't. But I think that's going to happen. You can actually order them online pretty easily. You can have them within 2 days. That's what my office did, and they're getting them. A lot going on there. I'm going to have I have a very optimistic prediction about this, so I'll save that for the next segment. Well, this will be our first prediction of the year of 2022. Dave, what do you got?
So my first prediction of the year is that the talk about carving out an exception to the filibuster in order to pass civil rights and voting rights legislation, I think someone is going to explain it to Manchin how important this is. That if you just look forward into the future of the threats to voting integrity, not just the gerrymandering that we talked about today, but more importantly, the access to mail-in ballots and a wider timeline for voting, et cetera. I think there needs to be voting reform, and I suspect that we will see some progress on at least the John Lewis bill, if not the other 2 bills that are pending right now. I think Manchin might actually come along and agree to this minor rule change for the sake of civil rights.
All right. I'm going to make a scientific prediction just based on several things I've read, including an article from John Hopkins. And I'm feeling optimistic just because the way I'm basically feeling. But I actually think Omicron is got a silver lining to it. It's spreading quickly. It's crowding out Delta. Right as of last week, Delta was the dominant the dominant variant in Humboldt County. I think by the end of next week, it no longer will be. It is much less deadly because it spreads by focusing itself, as you said, in the upper respiratory and not going down into it. Doesn't have any interest in the lower when it wants to spread to other people by doing this. It will crowd it out, and it's spreading so quickly that we may actually experience our first real herd immunity at this thing. And if enough people are also vaccinated, they're not going to change the definition of fully vaccinated anytime soon. So if you've even got the first basic vaccination, but especially if you're boosted, adding to that any type of natural herd immunity, we may actually see ourselves over the hump with this pandemic by mid-year. And that could be good news on all sorts of levels. That's my optimistic prediction based on 3 science articles I've read of sources I trust. I'm not a biologist, so I'm probably going out on a limb here, and all kinds of things are predictable. But I want to start off with some optimism here, just because I'm sitting here restless in a house that I can't really do much other than go for runs, make sure I stay away from people in the park other than that. But anyway, that's my prediction. All right. Well, until next time, stay informed, stay engaged, and we'll see you next time.